Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to make something that I'm calling Salted Caramel Flapjack Sensations. I actually received an email from Costco, and one of the items that they presented in the email was something called a Salted Caramel Sensation, and I looked at it and it looked to be like a cross between a flapjack and shortbread, with some caramel on the top and then some other toppings on top of that. And I thought, well, I could make something very similar to that, I'm sure. So I thought I would give it a try. So it's going to be quite simple, but it does take a little bit of time because you have to let things set. But we'll start off by preheating the oven to 180 Celsius. That's 160 Celsius with a fan, 350 Fahrenheit. And I've lined a 9-inch by 12-inch pan with some parchment paper, and it's quite shallow because it only needs to be deep enough to take the flapjack and then have the caramel poured onto it. If you don't have a pan of that size, you could use a 13 by 9 pan. You could even use a 9 by 9 one, but things would be then thicker, and the resultant flapjacks would be thicker. But anyway, so that's the pan I'm going to use, and I'll go on to the ingredients. And for the flapjacks, I have 400 grams, which is about 4.5 cups of oats here, and I just have my normal oats that I use for making my porridge. And I have 100 grams of old-fashioned rolled oats, and that works out at 1 1/3 cups. I have 250 grams of unsalted butter, and that's 2 sticks plus 1.5 tablespoons. I have 250 grams, which is 1 cup and a quarter of soft light brown sugar, and I have 100 grams, which is 5 tablespoons of golden syrup. If you don't have golden syrup, you could use honey or maple syrup or corn syrup, but golden syrup is the preferred one for me. And then for the caramel, very simple. I have 1 can, which is about 400 grams, 397 grams, which I think is 400 is about 14 ounces of condensed milk. I have 100 grams, again 5 tablespoons of golden syrup. I have 150 grams, which is 1 stick plus 2.5 tablespoons of butter. And then I have 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm going to put some of the salt into the caramel once the caramel is cooked, and the rest will be sprinkled on the top. And then to go on the top, I have 40 grams, which is 1/4 cup of pistachios, which are roughly chopped. 40 grams, 1/4 cup of chopped chopped hazelnuts, and these were chopped finer. I have another 1/4 cup, 40 grams of pumpkin seeds, and I have 40 grams, in fact I have 60 grams, which is 1/2 cup of chocolate chips, about 1/2 cup of chocolate chips, or chocolate, and I'm using milk chocolate, which I have chopped up into little chunks. So I'm going to set those ingredients aside and get on and make the fudge first of all, because that has to go into the oven. And so for the fudge, we need to melt the butter with the sugar and the golden syrup. So that can all go into a pan. And it's simply a question of heating it and stirring it until it's melted. So I'll turn the heat on, and I'll just mix this together and stir it until it's all melted and the sugar has dissolved. That shouldn't take very long at all. So as you can see, that's melted together quite nicely. So that's going to come off the heat. And I have put my oats, both types, into a bowl, and I've stirred them together. And what I'm going to do is to simply pour my butter, sugar and syrup mixture in and stir it around. So that mixture is quite good, so that then needs to be tipped into our prepared tin. And then it needs to be spread around and evened out and then packed down. And with that packed in like that, and I've levelled it off, I'm going to put that into the oven and I'm going to bake it for about 25 or 30 minutes until I can see that it's baked and beginning to brown around the edges. Then I take it out and it needs to cool down, and as that's cooling down we'll make the salted caramel to go on the top. So to make the caramel, I'm going to put my 150 grams of butter and my can of condensed milk and the golden syrup into a saucepan, and I'm going to heat those and boil them until they turn a nice caramel colour and it starts to thicken. And the temperature should reach about 115, 116 Celsius, and that ought to be thick enough to set the caramel quite thickly. Slightly lower temperature will thicken it, not quite so much. It's a matter of personal taste, and that would be about 240, 242 degrees Fahrenheit for those who work in Fahrenheit. So we'll put those ingredients in, and we'll bring them to the boil. And I will stir this as it's all coming together. Now, as you can see, the butter has almost melted and it's beginning to bubble on the side of the saucepan. Now this is going to get very, very hot. and very, very sticky. The one thing you do not want to do is to be tempted to dip fingers in or get yourself splashed with this, because it will burn. So my temperature has gone up to 112, 115 in some places, so I'm going to turn the heat off and I'm going to give that a bit of a stir, and then I'm going to pour it into a bowl to cool down. If the butter separates, I will just whisk it more and it will combine. And while that's still very, very hot, and I'm going to whisk that to incorporate the butter, I'm actually going to sprinkle in about half of my sugar as well, my salt should I say, and that's quite coarsely ground salt. So I've whisked the caramel, and as you can see it's already thickening quite nicely, so I'm going to leave that to cool down a little bit more, and then it will be ready to pour that onto our flapjack, which is just about baked now. So the flapjack is now out of the oven, but it's still very hot, so I'm going to leave that to cool down for a few minutes, and then I'll be ready to spread the caramel on. The caramel has begun to thicken quite nicely as it cools down, so I'm going to simply pour that on top of the flapjack, which is also firmed up, and I'm going to spread that across the surface. In a nice level layer, and I think that's good enough. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle the remainder of my salt on the top, and again the amount of salt you use is dependent on taste really. Like that, and then I'm going to sprinkle over the top as much of my hazelnuts, pistachios and chocolate chips as I think I need, and pumpkin seeds. And with those sprinkled over the top, I'm actually just going to give them a very little pat down to get them embedded into the caramel. Like that. And I'm going to leave that now to set. So once it's cooled down a little bit more, I'm going to put it into the fridge and leave it for a couple of hours, and then I'll come back and we'll cut it and we'll have a taste of it. So I put the salted caramel flapjack sensations into the fridge after they had cooled down, just so that the caramel set up a little bit. I've taken it out now and I've cut a few squares or bars, and this is what they look like. So you can see the flapjack there, and the caramel, and then the pistachios, hazelnuts, pumpkin seeds and chocolate on the top. So they look very good, and I'll cut a little piece and I'll just have a taste of it. It is very good. I get the flapjack flavour and the texture obviously, and I can actually taste the golden syrup in the flapjack, and then that caramel with just a little bit of salt in the background, which tastes very, very good. Sweet obviously, and then the various toppings, which pistachio, hazelnut, pumpkin seeds and chocolate, they are what they are basically. So these have turned out very well. I'm actually very pleased with them indeed. So I hope you've enjoyed the recipe, and if you have, please give me the thumbs up below and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for this recipe, and I'll put a link for it below the video as well. And I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.